The film set buzzed energetically, cameras spinning eagerly, lights shifting restlessly, and hushed murmurs moving swiftly among the crew. It seemed like another typical day, a routine scene, a predictable retake, but something felt distinctly off. Sandra Bullock knew it immediately upon stepping onto the set. A heavy, uncomfortable tension hung in the air, almost like walking into a room filled with a stale joke nobody wanted to hear again. At the center of this brewing storm stood John Hargrove, a director famed equally for his creative brilliance and his sharp-edged cruelty. Cameras rolled, pressures mounted, and subtle insults disguised as casual banter flew around freely. Every condescending remark was carefully calculated, aimed at slicing into Sandra's confidence in front of everyone present. Just as John prepared to deliver another cutting remark, the set door swung open dramatically. Keanu Reeves entered, instantly reading the tense atmosphere. Today's real drama wasn't scripted. It was happening right behind the scenes. Before the day ended, someone's reputation was on the line. Before we proceed, let us know where you're watching from, and if you enjoy these tasty behind-the-scenes stories, subscribe. Tomorrow promises another juicy narrative. The set continued humming busily, a coordinated chaos as crew members rushed to adjust lights, align cameras, and make quick last-minute script checks. Sandra Bullock took a deep breath before her trailer mirror. Today was particularly tough. Emotional scenes were her bread and butter, yet today's weight felt unusually heavy. Perhaps it was the intensity of the moment, or maybe John Hargrove himself, a visionary with zero tolerance for imperfection. Stepping onto set, Sandra felt tension as palpable as butter spread too thickly on cold bread. Today's scene was crucial, a deeply emotional moment intended to define her character, filled with profound pain and undeniable resilience. She knew exactly what the scene demanded. Cameras stood ready, the crew held their breath, all awaiting John's authoritative call. Action! Sandra threw herself into the scene, emotions raw, every word dripping authenticity. The air vibrated with the intensity of her performance. She finished powerfully, waiting in silent expectation. John's voice, however, was a sharp knife slicing through her hopeful silence. Not praise or helpful critique, just a bitter chuckle dripping disappointment. "That's the best you've got." Crew members stiffened anxiously. John stood, walking toward Sandra, his presence aggressively commanding. Her heart raced anxiously. She'd faced tough directors before, but John's approach uniquely felt personal, deliberately cutting deep. "Again," he snapped harshly, loudly adding, "and this time, pretend you actually care." Sandra's stomach churned painfully. She knew how to take criticism professionally, but John's condescending voice, deliberately loud enough for everyone to hear, felt intentionally humiliating. Hidden fists clenched tightly. She refused him the satisfaction of reaction. Cameras rolled again. This time, Sandra performed with even more profound intensity, feeling confident she nailed it perfectly. Yet immediately, John's mocking voice echoed cruelly across the set. "Wow, did our star finally burn out?" Awkward chuckles escaped a few crew members. Others looked down uncomfortably. Sandra's heart tightened, not from the insult itself, but its sharp, deliberate cruelty. She remained rigid, but inside, something fragile cracked. A painful silence filled the room. Sandra wondered privately if she was the only one feeling humiliated. John's harsh words lingered heavily. She had endured demanding directors, exhausting roles, but humiliation before an entire crew was different, piercing through her self-assurance. Doubts crept in subtly. Was John right? Had she lost her magic? Forcing away negativity, she steadied herself internally. She knew her talent, her worth, determined not to let John's arrogance overshadow her confidence. John broke the silence with a sarcastic clap. "Again, maybe this time our leading lady will finally show up." Sandra inhaled sharply, nodding subtly at the assistant director. "Just finish, prove him wrong," she thought determinedly. Cameras whirled once more, and Sandra submerged herself fully into the character, channeling authentic pain, real depth. This time she felt sure, it was perfect. Yet John's voice sliced again, colder and sharper. "Still missing something. Maybe you need to watch your old films and relearn acting." A ripple of awkward laughter followed, Sandra's humiliation deepening painfully. Would anyone dare speak up against John? Crew members exchanged uncomfortable looks, some ashamed, others just relieved they weren't targets themselves. Then John landed his final blow, arms crossed smugly, leaning back with exaggerated arrogance. "Sandra, darling, one more failed take, and we'll discuss your replacement." Understood? A chill ran through Sandra's spine. She knew he wasn't entirely serious. She was the studio's choice, but his message was loud and clear. She was replaceable, and no one on set would stand up for her. But precisely at that moment, someone new arrived, instantly shifting the power dynamic. Sandra turned slightly, recognizing Keanu Reeves, his presence calm, commanding, silently authoritative. His eyes quickly assessed the room's tension, eyebrows knitting slightly in quiet understanding. Sandra sensed immediate relief. John was entirely unaware of what was coming next. The tension grew thicker, the set feeling almost suffocating. Sandra stood stiffly, humiliation simmering beneath a composed exterior, while John sat confidently in his director's chair, satisfied he had made his point. No one dared challenge him openly. Yet, as the heavy studio door swung open again, the entire atmosphere shifted once more. Keanu Reeves stepped quietly, yet deliberately inside. Keanu advanced slowly, taking in everything carefully. He had witnessed countless difficult shoots, navigated countless demanding directors, and immediately grasped the underlying dynamics. His arrival brought a subtle but clear shift, a quiet challenge to John's authority. John barely noticed initially, distracted by his own smugness, confidently directing the crew to reset again. Sandra caught Keanu's glance briefly, a silent reassurance exchanged. Keanu understood exactly what was unfolding. Crew members cautiously glanced between John and Keanu, sensing impending confrontation. Keanu's subtle confidence began to erode John's previously unchallenged dominance. Sandra felt a sudden burst of hope and resolve. Today was about respect, and with Keanu's calm presence beside her, Sandra's confidence began to resurface. John finally noticed Keanu, arrogance faltering momentarily. "Keanu, good to have you here," John called casually, masking surprise poorly. Keanu simply nodded politely, his silence speaking volumes. Sandra exhaled slowly, regaining composure. Keanu's quiet confidence seemed to amplify her resolve. John, slightly rattled by Keanu's unexpected presence, attempted to regain his dominance, calling loudly for another take. Sandra prepared herself once more, deeply focused. Cameras rolled again, and this time, strengthened by silent support, she performed powerfully, her portrayal deeper, undeniably authentic. The performance resonated strongly throughout the set, unmistakably perfect. As the scene concluded, heavy silence fell again. John hesitated, realizing the undeniable quality of Sandra's performance. Crew members subtly looked at each other, silently agreeing on the scene's perfection. Sandra stood, waiting, her heartbeat steadying. John cleared his throat awkwardly, reluctantly acknowledging, "Better." This reluctant praise, however small, marked a subtle victory for Sandra. With Keanu's quiet solidarity, Sandra felt empowered, reclaiming the respect that John had tried so desperately to strip away. Though the day had begun with humiliation and doubt, it ended with Sandra quietly reasserting her strength, dignity, and undeniable talent, reminding everyone, including John, that she remained a star, burning brighter than ever. Yet this was entirely different. The vibe in the room felt strange, as if everyone was tiptoeing across thin ice, as though all the air had vanished when John began to speak. The way Sandra stood rigid, expressionless yet clearly hiding something, told Keanu Reeves everything he needed to grasp. Something had clearly gone down, something wasn't right. John finally spotted Keanu's arrival. His cocky smile faltered briefly because Keanu wasn't just any actor. He was Keanu Reeves, a seasoned industry figure revered even by those outside of Hollywood. John plastered a casual grin, standing slowly from his chair. "Look who decided to grace us, the legend himself." Keanu's face didn't shift. "Hello, John," he replied, calm yet laced with subtle tension. John gestured towards Sandra mockingly. "You're just in time to see your co-star trying to act again." Several crew members tensed slightly. Sandra kept silent, but Keanu's eyes narrowed faintly, a shadow of something fierce crossing his expression, the sort of look that usually made people reconsider their next words carefully. John either didn't see it or didn't mind it. He clapped loudly, directing the crew. "Reset everyone. Maybe we'll get a decent take this time." He glanced at Sandra with mock encouragement. "Unless, of course, you need a rest?" It was a clear taunt, a dare, but before Sandra could respond, Keanu spoke softly. "Maybe we all need a moment." The set fell quiet. John turned sharply, his grin fading. "Excuse me." Keanu's gaze held firm. "A short break. You've been pushing everyone hard. Maybe stepping back briefly would help." John chuckled dismissively. We're already behind. We don't have time for breaks. Keanu tilted his head slightly. Then perhaps pushing your crew until they're exhausted isn't the best approach. Several crew members glanced at each other. It wasn't a loud protest, but it was clear enough to cause a tiny fracture in John's unquestioned authority. John's smile tightened visibly. Thanks for your concern, but I know exactly how to run my set. Keanu didn't flinch. Then maybe start showing it, he replied calmly, smoothly delivering the words like a perfectly timed punchline. Shock rippled quietly through the room. Even Sandra held her breath. John's expression darkened immediately. Excuse me? Keanu spoke quietly yet firmly. Do you genuinely think humiliating people improves their performance? From what I've seen, everyone here is too scared even to breathe. John's face twitched slightly. Do you realize how many films I've directed? Keanu nodded evenly. And do you realize how many crew members finished those films hating the experience? This clearly struck John. He stood stunned, momentarily speechless. Sandra stepped forward, her voice calm and clear. Keanu's right. John turned sharply, his eyes narrowing. Sandra, but she didn't back down. Making a movie isn't just about the film. It's about respecting the people behind it. She glanced around at the crew, the cast, the silent spectators. We all love this project, but none of us deserve to feel expendable. A few heads nodded slightly, others shuffled uneasily. Everyone silently agreed, though fear had kept them silent until now. John laughed bitterly, shaking his head in disbelief. You two think you can walk in and tell me how to run things? His voice rose challengingly. Anyone unhappy with my methods can leave. The silence that followed felt like a turning point, no longer fearful, but charged with meaning. Sandra glanced at Keanu, then back to John. I'll go first. Gasps echoed faintly through the crew. John's face paled instantly. Sandra, don't be foolish. She stepped backward firmly. No movie is worth losing my self-respect over, and no director earns my respect by disrespecting me. She turned towards the crew. Who's with me? Then came an unexpected noise. The assistant director placed his clipboard down. A camera operator stepped back, while the script supervisor crossed her arms defiantly. One by one, more crew members began making their stand, a choice John never imagined they'd make. John's grip was slipping. For the first time, he wasn't giving orders. He faced a critical moment. Would he risk his career by doubling down or finally accept he wasn't invincible? Footsteps echoed gently as crew members stepped away slowly. John sat frozen, watching in disbelief as his control crumbled. His methods, fear, pressure, control, were unraveling in front of him, sparked by Sandra and Keanu's calm defiance. Not everyone moved. Some crew remained still, hesitant to risk their positions. Others exchanged glances filled with silent agreement, resentment surfacing after enduring years of John's harshness masked as perfectionism. The lighting tech, Eric, broke the quiet first. 15 years on set, and this is the first time I've dreaded coming to work every day. John's eyes flashed angrily. Excuse me, but Eric continued steadily. You think breaking people down equals great directing. It doesn't. Quiet murmurs of support rose. The assistant director, Lena, crossed her arms. We've tried to warn you for months, John. Your methods don't work anymore, and now you're seeing why. John laughed harshly, desperate to maintain control. So, you're all rebelling now? Do you honestly think this film can happen without me? The silence that followed was louder than shouting. Sandra stepped forward confidently. No one says the movie doesn't need direction, John. It just doesn't need your direction. John stared at her silently, unreadable yet fully aware he had pushed too far. For the first time, he was losing. Sandra straightened confidently. I'm serious. If this doesn't change, I quit. John's jaw tightened. You're under contract. Keanu spoke quietly, authority behind his calm voice. So is the studio, John, which means they're involved in whatever happens next. In that moment, John realized he was losing control, because he wasn't the sole power anymore. Decisions now belonged equally to the studio, the producers, people who had just witnessed their leading actress and critical crew members threaten to walk out. The air on set had irrevocably shifted, marking the end of John's absolute rule. As John glanced around at the faces staring back at him, he finally saw it clearly. He was alone. A heavy silence blanketed the set as a production aide hurried off, probably rushing to alert the executives about the unfolding drama. John's fists tightened because for the first time in his career, His future was no longer solely in his hands. Whatever happened in the next meeting would decide if he even had a career left at all. The studio's conference room felt chillier than usual, or maybe it was just the thick tension hanging in the air. Sandra sat at the table, arms crossed, her expression steady yet impossible to read. Beside her, Keanu Reeves appeared calm, solid as always, his presence quietly powerful. Opposite them, John Hargrove was no longer smiling. The head producer, Mark Levinson, adjusted his glasses thoughtfully, shuffling through some documents. He had already heard exactly what occurred on set, and now he was about to seal John's fate. "Let's skip the small talk." Mark finally spoke, sharp and professional. "We have a real issue here, and it isn't about schedules. It's about respect, about the environment on set." John chuckled dryly, leaning back casually in his chair. "Really, Mark? Are we actually having this conversation? I push actors to deliver their absolute best. That's my job, always has been." Sandra's expression remained unchanged, but Keanu tilted his head slightly, his sharp gaze locked firmly on John. Mark wasn't buying John's defense. "That's not the issue, John," Mark said, tapping his fingers on the table. "It's not your directing style, it's how you disrespect the people you're working with." A few executives nodded subtly. For the first time, John seemed genuinely unsettled. Lena, the assistant director, broke the silence next. "John, it's more than just pushing actors. You publicly embarrass them, belittle them in front of the entire crew. What's the point? Feeling powerful?" John clenched his jaw, scoffing. "Please, Sandra knows this business well enough." Sandra finally spoke, calmly yet firmly. "Yes, I do, and I also know the difference between a challenging director and a toxic one." John rolled his eyes dismissively. "Come on, give it a rest." Keanu leaned forward slightly, his voice steady but authoritative. "She's not alone, John." John went quiet, understanding exactly what Keanu meant. It wasn't only about Sandra, it was the whole crew finally speaking up, and now the studio was paying close attention. Mark sighed, setting his papers down decisively. "Here's the bottom line, John. We can't continue this film in a hostile environment. The studio has invested too much to risk losing everything over power struggles." John stiffened visibly. "Meaning?" Mark exchanged looks with the other executives, delivering the final blow. "Meaning if things don't change immediately, we'll find someone else." Those words hit hard. John appeared truly rattled for the first time. "You can't be serious." Mark didn't flinch. "Try me." Silence stretched, intense and unyielding. Sandra and Keanu watched quietly as John processed this new reality. He could challenge it and risk losing his job entirely, or he could swallow his pride. John scanned the room, his eyes flicking from Mark to the executives, then to Sandra, and finally settling on Keanu. Keanu stared back coolly, completely calm and unreadable, causing something inside John to crack. John exhaled slowly, lowering his gaze to the table. "So, what exactly do you expect from me?" Sandra raised an eyebrow slightly. Keanu remained silent. Mark smiled faintly, realizing John had admitted defeat. Yet, whether John could truly change remained uncertain. John sat quietly, realizing for the first time in his career, he wasn't the one holding all the cards. The studio had spoken clearly, the crew had stood firm, and now John faced a clear choice: adapt or walk away. John Hargrove wasn't quite ready to give up. During a filming break, Sandra and Keanu stood near the monitors, reviewing the last scene. Sandra sighed softly. "Think he'll stick with this?" Keanu sipped his coffee thoughtfully. "People don't transform overnight." He turned to her, his eyes knowing but reassuring. "But sometimes they change just enough." Sandra smiled, feeling the heaviness lift for the first time since filming began. For once, being on set actually felt right. When cameras resumed, Sandra delivered an outstanding performance. The crew watched in quiet awe. Even John, observing from behind the monitor, nodded slightly in approval. Yet the real question lingered. Was this new John here to stay, or was it merely another act? Only time would reveal the truth. The atmosphere on set gradually shifted. Though not suddenly perfect, the workplace improved significantly. John remained strict and demanding, but learned to control his temper. Critiques were constructive instead of cruel, pushing actors without humiliating them. Sandra, for the first time in ages, genuinely enjoyed her work again. One evening after wrapping up filming, Sandra packed her belongings when a familiar voice spoke up. "You were exceptional today." She turned, finding John standing there awkwardly, hands in his pockets. Sandra regarded him carefully. Thanks. John hesitated before continuing. I meant what I said earlier. I pushed too hard, almost lost everything. Sandra raised an eyebrow. Almost. John gave a slight smirk. Let's just say luck intervened. He glanced toward the crew, relaxed and laughing in a way he'd never noticed before. If Keanu hadn't spoken up and you hadn't stood your ground, I doubt I'd still be here. Sandra crossed her arms. So, is this the new John Hargrove? John sighed lightly. Honestly, I'm not sure, but I'm trying. Sandra nodded slowly. That's all anyone can ask. Days later, Sandra sat in her trailer, flipping through a potential script when a gentle knock sounded. Keanu stepped inside, offering his familiar, knowing smile. Got a minute? She motioned for him to sit, sensing he had news. Keanu slid a folder toward her. She flipped through the first pages, eyebrows raised. New project. Keanu nodded. Script strong, and they want both of us. Sandra smirked playfully. Another intense drama, or something lighter? Keanu chuckled warmly. A bit of both. She leaned back thoughtfully. Who's directing? Keanu grinned knowingly. This time, that's our choice. Sandra laughed softly, shaking her head. For the first time in years, she felt fully in control of her career, her choices, and her future. Glancing down at the script, she realized one comforting fact. Whatever came next, she wouldn't face it alone. Thank you for watching. If the story warms your heart, subscribe to the channel and click the screen for more inspirational stories of resilience, compassion, and hope.